From what I understand, the human body hasn't become more resilient over time. Like if you take a human being from the 5th century AD and you looked at us now, like we would essentially have the same lifespan. The difference is medicine is not as good. There was more people dying from famine. Hand-to-hand combat was more prevalent.
Right.
But essentially, if you could put those two people in a vacuum in different time frames, we'd live about the same time.
Yeah. It's mainly, I mean, the big advance around 100 years ago was sanitation.
Okay.
I mean, most people just got, a lot of bugs in their system, and eventually it, killed them. And that was 100, and I think in 1890s, stomach problems, which was just a generic term, was the main reason people died. Nobody died of cancer. I mean, almost nobody died of cancer because they were dead already, before they got it.
Right.
People didn't die of heart attacks until the 50s and 60s, because they were already dying before that. And a lot of times it was just sanitation, or a lot of times it was childbirth. 1 out of 5 children died in childbirth in 1900. So once we started getting just good sanitation, more people lived longer. And then sulfa drugs and penicillin and those sorts of things. I mean, people would routinely die from typhus or scarlet fever or, even, I don't know, just a sore throat.
A bad cough.
And we'd just get out of hand, and now, all those drugs keep people alive now. And then statins came along and, all sorts of other drugs that are extending life. But one of the things I discovered with Immortality, Inc. was people were living longer, but not necessarily better.
Mm-hmm.
You see a lot of people in their 80s and they're just struggling, or even in their 90s, but no one's living a great life up to 100, and dementia starts to kick in almost universally by 90, so it's just, you always find good stories of people that, are 100 years old and smoking cigarettes and drinking and they're just fine. But one of the things we discovered in the course of the book was those are people that mainly don't have very many bad genes. That's ultimately what gets you.
Bad genes.
Bad genes. Like if you have a heart issue, your vascular system is going to break down at some point. Nobody has perfect genes, but those people that have something closer to perfect genes are the ones that live the longest.
Interesting.
So at some point, no matter how much you work out, no matter how great, your diet, eventually your genes are going to get you. So that's where the work that Art Levinson and Calico is doing, where he's basically trying to figure out what are the switches that get flipped in our DNA that make us actually age. There's something going on that says it's time to age. It's time to start breaking down. Otherwise, we just rebuild our bodies. We're perfectly capable of it.
Right.
So that's where stem cell therapy and that sort of thing can help extend life.
What do people like Art Levinson or Ray Kurzweil, what do they say as far as like a timeline to when we're going to be able to extend our lives significantly? And how long, and not only like when in the future do they think that will happen, but how much longer do they think they're going to be able to make humans live?
Oh, okay. Great questions. Well, Kurzweil always has very specific numbers, for everything that he's predicted, and often he's quite right or very close. He pretty much believes that by the late 2020s, we will have created enough advances and he predicted this in 2000, enough advances biologically that we can begin to extend life longer. Basically extend life. For every year you're alive, you would be able to extend life another year.
So you could be able to stay stagnant.
Yeah, you can keep yourself going and keep yourself going kind of at that level of health, whatever it is.
And we'll get there in the late 2020s, he thinks?
Yeah. And I think that sounds pretty accurate. And then he believes that in the early 2030s, what will kick in is nanotechnology. So basically you can have molecular-sized machines that are obviously invisible, and they're just mechanical versions of biology. So they go in and clean out your heart, or go in and augment your brain. Suddenly you just, with the flick of a switch, you're in another world because you have nanotechnology in your brain that's just creating that world. So they're artificial neurons, artificial cells, that can do anything your body can do except better. And then that really begins to reverse aging, so that you can actually get younger, not simply continue to stay alive. And then once that happens, you could basically live forever. And I think Aubrey de Grey calculated at one point you would probably live 1,000 years, and then something would get you. You'd get hit by lightning or by a bus or
something that is just so catastrophic you can't come back from it.
Yeah, some random event.
Eaten by a shark.
Yeah, right. Some random event's going to happen.
Yeah, but won't those people be able to at some point upload their brain to a chip or to a flash drive, and if their body gets eaten by a shark, they'll have a backup. They'll be able to just plug it into a cyborg or something.
Yeah, well, and that's exactly the premise of Doppelganger.
Oh, okay.
That is precisely that, and that the concept or the kernel of that story goes way back to a meeting that I had with a guy named Hans Moravec at Carnegie Mellon, and he was the head of Carnegie Mellon's Robotics Institute. And he was he wrote a couple of really interesting books. One of them was called Mind Children. And he was the first scientist to say we could download a human brain into a machine. A robot was the way because he was a roboticist. Mm-hmm. And I remember when I read that, I went, whoa, and then I thought, well, what if this guy uploads or downloads his brain on Friday and he's murdered on Sunday. And then you give him his backup, and his backup is from Friday. So when he wakes up on Tuesday, he thinks it's Friday and he doesn't know that he was murdered.
Right.
But he would want to know once he finds out who killed him. And that's the underlying premise of Doppelganger. And it, basically buys into the concept that someday we will be able to, completely download a copy of yourself. Yeah, whoa. and that, of course, creates all sorts of other possibilities because then you can make doubles of yourself.
Right.
And then versions of yourself could go off and do things and then come back and put it all together in one brain. I mean, there's all sorts of, ways that it could go.
Oh, yeah, that gets scary. That gets scary quick. What's to stop tyrannical dictators from just duplicating themselves 1,000 times and spreading themselves all over the world?
Right. Yeah, there are certain people I think we can all agree we don't want to have another one of them.
Right. Oh my God, that's terrifying, man.
Yeah. So I mean, one of the reasons that I was fascinated by this, and there's really documentaries that got me into science. I was an English major, so one of the things that got me into it was, there's philosophy and there's history and, everybody has an opinion basically when it comes to those kinds of things, when it comes to the human behavior and human culture. But science at least has a shot at truly understanding how things work, and if we can get a handle on it, then, so we're creating these powerful AIs. They could help us solve those problems. There are some wonderful things that artificial intelligence can do. And there are incredible technologies we've created that can solve a lot of problems. But, we have to be very careful because, just take nuclear power. Everything's a double-edged sword. Mm-hmm. Every technology going back to the first knife is literally a double-edged sword.
Right.
So do you want to kill someone with that knife, or do you want to use it to, have some meat so that you can survive? I just think it's all fascinating, and we really are coming to a time in human culture where a lot of these problems, big problems, can be solved, but they can also be incredibly dangerous. So what are we going to do? There are people that are also using stem cells from other stem cell lines that aren't yours, and using those to boost people it's sort of in the way that they use, I think it's called PRP, with baseball players and that sort of thing, where you're using, plasma, injections to, to kind of boost your system.
From other people?
No, from themselves.
Oh, okay.
In that case. But yeah, there are definitely people. In fact, Robert Hariri already, says, take your own stem cells and put them in a refrigerator.
Really?
Yeah, and save them.
Don't people save like
cord blood,
umbilical cords of their babies?
Yeah, and I highly recommend it.
Really?
Yeah, because
did you do it?
Did I do it?
Yeah. Do you save the umbilical cords of your children, or do you have kids? I don't know if you have kids or not.
I have kids, but
okay.
they were too. They were.
That was before that.
Yeah,
okay.
It was before that you could do that. I would have absolutely
right.
done it. Because basically,
but they make it super expensive too.
Well, it's more expensive than you want. And again, it would be nice if this sort of thing would go mainstream.
Yeah.
But the FDA kind of watches that too. But Bob Hariri is the guy, he's in the book. He's the first guy to figure that out.
Really?
Yeah. He was a guy that, he was a trauma surgeon. And so he was actually dealing one day with a woman whose husband had been massively damaged, brain damage in a car accident. And he was trying to console her and trying to figure out, how could I help this guy? And he went down, and his own child, before she was born, his wife was getting a sonogram. And he's looking at the sonogram, and he goes, wow. He goes, there's the embryo, and then there's this big mass there. And he realized it was the placenta. And he goes, wow. He goes, that's big. What's it doing? And what it's doing is it's pumping tons of stem cells into the baby. And so he said, we just tossed this stuff in the garbage, literally. It's called the afterbirth. And he said, I realized that what it is a stem cell factory. And he said, so that's what he's been working on for 25 years, and he's making real progress now in trying to create medicine where you can use the stem cells, your own stem cells or your children's stem cells, and create a medicine so that you can either inject or take a pill that would solve problem. An example would be sarcopenia, which is muscle wasting. Now, everybody gets muscle wasting disease as they age. It's just part of what aging is. And sarcopenia is something that you get when you're younger, and so they try to solve that problem, and it's very difficult to solve. It's genetic. So that's one of the first things he wants to do is to be able to solve that for aging, because, as he pointed out, he said, when a 30-year-old man has turned 60, he's lost 60, he's just using men as an example, he's lost 60% of his muscle mass. And he said, when you lose 60% of your muscle mass, you're not just losing muscle, you're losing almost 100%.
Bone mass too?
You're losing vascular capability. That's most of your vascular system is in your muscle, and that's what's delivering your immune system. That's what's delivering all the nutrients to your body. And so you're just going downhill. And so he figures if he can come up with a way to reboost, muscle mass, then you're boosting the whole system.
Interesting.
So that's where I think the first breakthroughs. I wrote this when the book came out. I wrote an article in The Hill, and I basically said I think there are 4 things that are going to happen, within the next, at that time, 5 to 10 years. So now we're 4 years in. First, stem cells, which will boost and lengthen healthy life. And the second thing is genomics. We're rapidly, and AI is helping this, we're rapidly figuring out what's going on with the human genome, what the hell? It's so complicated. And the third thing is really what Calico is working on, really trying to understand what are those switches. Once you understand the genomics well enough, then what are the systems in the body that are causing aging, and then turn them off. And then AI is absolutely necessary to figuring that out, because you're not going to get a bench scientist that can get down there and look at cells and figure it out. It's all happening way too fast.
So the guy who was in the violent car accident, was he able to help him at all with stem cells?
No, because, first of all, it was just a concept Then it was like the light bulb went off. But then he had to figure out, well, what's the placenta? And he had to do all sorts of research and everything. He has more degrees than.
And is there a difference between using the placenta and the umbilical cord?
Yeah. The placenta. Well, the umbilical cord is what is the connection between the placenta and the baby and the mother.
Okay.
So they're, but it's this little engine that's it's what makes stem cells.
So you want to save the placenta, not the umbilical cord.
Right. But people do also, there's a lot in the cord blood.
Cord blood. Okay.
A lot of people do that. But if I were giving advice to anybody, and I'm not a doctor, but, I would say look into, if you're having a child, saving the placenta. Don't throw away the afterbirth.
And what is the benefit of having the placenta of your own child versus people who just get stem cells from, how does it work otherwise? Does people just get random stem cells?
That's a really great question. It's a really important one too. If you are using your own stem cells, then they recognize themselves. And so they will literally go in and boost you.
Okay.
If it's somebody else's cells, then what happens is they'll go in and your body goes, okay, this is boosting. And there are these communicators called exosomes that every cell has, and they create the communication between different cells, and there's billions and billions of them in every cell. And so what happens is when somebody else's stem cells are injected, they're released, and they seem to boost your own cells, but the stem cells themselves, within a week are just go out of your system. Okay. But if they're your own stem cells, then let's say, let's say you have heart problem, and you get your body injected with your own stem cells into your own body. Your body's going to start, looking around for trouble because that's what it does. That's what stem cells do. They're replenishing your body all the time, and it's going to find trouble and it's going to fix it. But
even like a jammed artery can do that?
Well, it'll make it younger. It'll make it more pliable. It'll make it, it may not get rid of the plaque, but it'll make it, be able to handle it better.
Son of a bitch. Steve, I have to have another kid now. I thought I was done. That's wild.
Yeah. Well, even it's still not too late. I mean, no matter how old any of us is and or how old your children are, it's relatively simple to save your own stem cells. So if you have young children, you can still save their.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can have the fat, have some fat pulled out. And once you have the stem cell, then you can create lines of stem cells. So you can create millions and millions of stem cells that are all identical copies.
Okay.
And so it's not like you need to constantly re-inject.
So where do I take my baby? I got a 1-year-old.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Can I just go to CVS and just take the stem cells?
Wouldn't that be nice? Let's get to that soon.
Is there a drive-through?
Yeah. No, I mean, I'll put you in touch with Bob Hariri.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
He created the first company to save placental stem cells.
Oh, wow.
In fact, I think he did cord blood first.
I was thinking about this when I was reading your book, The Last Ape Standing, that there are, when it comes to different types of animal species, like specifically whales or most animal species, there's such a wide variety of them, right? Like whales and dolphins and sharks and fish and everything else. But when it comes to us, there's no variety. There's basically one basic standard cutout of a human, and there's no evolutionary drift much. You know what I mean? There's such a wide gap between us and the next primate. Yeah.
Well, that was pretty much what Last Ape Standing was about. From the research that I did over the last 7 million years, when the first hominin kind of emerged, there've been, I think now 29 hominin or human, creatures that evolved. And at one point, at least 5 were living simultaneously throughout the planet. probably a lot more. We just don't know about them because you only find what you find. You know, there's some fossils are hard to find. But there were Denisovans, there were Neanderthals, there were Homo sapiens, there were Homo erectus, and there were
Floriensis.
Yeah, the Floriensis. And so those are five that 75,000 years ago were, and we were actually barely surviving. You know, there were only probably a couple of thousand of us because most of Africa had been, decimated in a, we don't know if it was a huge volcanic eruption. Or
70,000 years ago?
75,000 years.
Right.
So, the fact that, so there were lots of other creatures and they were highly intelligent, very, very bright and doing just fine. I mean, Neanderthals were around for, I don't know, almost 400,000 or 300,000 years, 400,000 years. And they survived 3 ice ages up in Europe, whereas we were down in Africa. It was much warmer. So that was the essential question of Last Ape Standing. Why are we the only one left?
Right.
And essentially we seem to be slightly more flexible. We're more adaptable. And the thinking that I came away with in it was that we're born very young.
Yes.
It's a trait called neoteny, which means a creature is born young. And it's kind of
takes us forever to be able to survive and take care of ourselves.
Right.
Most animals are born and they got a couple hours to figure it out.
Right. Wildebeest hits the ground, comes out of the womb, and he's already up and running. A horse, same thing. And that was probably more true of some of these other species. But because of the size of our heads, we couldn't have the baby. You couldn't keep the baby in the mother any longer than 9 months. You had to get the baby out, and evolution taught us that 9 months was it. Now, when a human baby comes out in 9 months, after 9 months of gestation, they're helpless, and for the next 4 years, their brain is growing at an incredible clip. So basically, a lot of what happens in the womb with other animals is happening outside the womb with us. And what that means is your personal experience is being changed by the neurons that are rapidly developing in your brain. So you're not being driven by your genetics, you're being driven by your genetics and your experience. Mm-hmm. And so if you're hearing music, if you're, your parents are really tuned in, if depending on where you're living, a million different things that are going on in your brain whenever you're a year old. And there is an enormous amount of brain cells that are being made at that age. It's shaping literally you, and that's why we're so unique. Each of us is not so much like a horse, another horse. Horses and dogs and everything are different, but they're not as different as we are. And they're not as smart as we are, and they're not as pliable and creative as we are. And again, ironically, because of that, we were able to create these technologies and then build on them and learn from them, create language and create writing. All things that enable us to build on the past so that we get culturally more and more intelligent.
But why is there such a big gap between us and why is there such a big gap between us and the next primate? Why don't we see any sort of middle ground? And why don't we see apes evolving still, or do we?
They're evolving, just slow, and we're evolving slowly too. But our culture moves rapidly. I think the answer to that is, for one reason or another, and there are probably multiple reasons. All of those other highly intelligent creatures that were around when we were are gone. They were way more intelligent than your average chimpanzee, but they're gone. And now we played a role probably with Denisovans and Neanderthals, because we moved into territory where, first of all, they were struggling. There were maybe 100,000 Neanderthals spread from Britain to the Atlas Mountains. That's just not very many people over that broad a space. And so they didn't build cultures as rapidly as we did. We were just more successful at procreating. And then we built tools that were probably a little better than their tools. And so we just started taking over their territory. And it may have been just simply that. And we might have also just mated with them and kind of overrun them, genetically. Because you probably have Neanderthal genes in you. I have 4%, and I think it's 8% of my genes are Neanderthal. So somebody was mating with somebody somewhere down the road there. And so, for one reason or another, they just got wiped out, by 30,000 years ago. And my guess is probably more like 20,000 years ago, the last of them departed. And the same thing happened with Denisovans, who moved more toward Asia. And, the other ones probably just couldn't survive, I mean, every species goes extinct. 99% of all species are extinct, so eventually everyone goes the way of the dinosaur.
Do you think the timeline for humans has been linear, like perfectly linear, like it's thought of conventionally? Like we started out as apes and we just progressively got better and more technological, or do you think there was any sort of like recess? Do you think it's possible that there was a more advanced version of us
in the past?
In the past.
Well, the fossil evidence doesn't indicate that yet. We haven't found any, fossils of more advanced creatures, although how we would know that is hard because all you've got left is bone, and you only get so much DNA. But from a scientific point of view, I mean, I think there are probably theories about that, but from a scientific point of view, there hasn't been anything found that said, oh, here's a creature that's smarter than we were. Neanderthals actually had a larger brain than we did, and they may have even had more neurons than we did. But how they were put together, nobody really knows. They may not have had, they probably didn't have speech that was as complex as ours just because of the way their throats were. But, and that just might have been a fluke. We might have just gotten lucky that we could make the sounds that we make, and we were able to use them to communicate. I mean, it's kind of odd when you think about it. I'm sitting here, I'm making noises at you, and you're hearing these noises, and somehow you know what they mean. And we just make these noises back and forth. When you go out to other countries and you hear somebody speaking a different language, it just sounds like gibberish. But we're able to do it. It's a really smart technology. And I don't know if Neanderthals could do that. And if they couldn't, it meant that they couldn't communicate as effectively, and therefore they couldn't build tools and culture as rapidly. And so, when they just couldn't survive it.
There's people who get their heads severed and put into these cryo chambers or whatever.
Yeah.
Like the people that own those cryogenics companies out in the desert in Arizona. Like, do you think the first thing that they're going to be worried about is saving those heads when the grid goes down? I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so. And plus, they would, after a few weeks, they would start to warm up. But yeah, I spent a whole lot of time down there. I almost forgot. It's how I opened the book. I spent a whole lot of time down at Alcor, and to see how that works, and what the whole thinking is
I had a guy in here once who he had a dog tag around his neck he was wearing, and I was like, "What is that?" He's like, "Oh, this is." We didn't even plan on talking about it, but he brought it. He was like, "Yeah, I paid an exorbitant amount of money, to reserve a freezer for my brain after I die."
Yeah, and he's only doing the brain. If you pay more if you're doing your whole body.
Oh, people do their entire body.
Yeah. And essentially, it's like plexiglass. That's all that's left. Because they just slowly freeze you down and then take all the moisture out of your body, and all of which will come back. But the whole concept is that you won't come back until the technology exists to reanimate you. But
we don't have the technology to reanimate anybody yet.
No, we don't. But as one scientist that's in the book, put it to me, he said, "Look, it's like an experiment." He said, you have the control and you have the experimental animal, and he said, "Clearly, I'm the experiment because I've done this." He said, "But I already know what happens to the controls. They all die." He said, "So, what's the downside?"
Wow.
May as well give it a shot.
Yeah, it's a gamble. If you got that kind of money to throw at something like that, I guess why not?
Well, they argue that you can get a life insurance policy and then turn the life insurance policy over to them, so that when they die, they become the beneficiary. Alcor becomes the beneficiary of the life insurance policy, so you don't have to actually pay.
Oh, really?
$250,000. You just get a $250,000 life insurance policy. Then you turn it over to Alcor. So you're paying the premium, but it's nothing like that amount of money.
Yeah. I was always just so skeptical that was just some big scam.
I know the guy that I spent a lot of time there, and I know the guy that runs it, Max. I'm trying to remember his last name now, but he's legit.
Really?
Yeah, they're not making tons of money from it or anything. I mean, it's there. I saw it. I saw everything they do. It's not something they're making up and just putting the money in their pocket. Mm-hmm. And they have a lot of rules and regulations and everything. That money is set aside, and it's even set aside that when you wake up, you'll be able to get back on your feet financially and live a life.
Really?
Yeah.
Do they have a plan for what happens? Because if you're dead, right, like legally you're dead, so they get the money from your life insurance policy, right?
Right.
Do they have a plan on what happens 400 years from now whenever that person comes back to life?
I'm not sure if they're buying into the idea that in 400 years they won't have solved the problem. I think that's the way they see it. So it's a good question. I don't think I asked that question because they clearly feel that they're going to solve the problem, or that science will at some point solve the problem, and so they create. It's a foundation, so the money goes into the foundation, and then it's invested. So somebody's going to have a boatload of money, that's for sure.
Right.
If they don't figure it out.
Wow.
And some of the people were, they were frozen in the 70s and 80s. I mean, there's no chance that they're ever coming back. I mean, the technology just wasn't good enough to get them to a state. I don't think. I suppose it's possible that if you could, some genetic technologies might 100 years from now be able to reanimate anybody.
Didn't Steve Jobs have that done?
No, he didn't have it. There were discussions about it, and there was discussion. There's stories that Disney had it done and stuff like that.
Oh, really?
But he didn't. He's really in, he's really in a cemetery right outside of Burbank. But Ted Williams is there, and his son is there.
Who's Ted Williams?
Ted Williams, one of the greatest hitters ever.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He was the last guy to hit over 400.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. And his son, ironically, he got his son in, or he got his dad in, and then he died of cancer.
Ooh.
So he's there too.
Wow.
I wonder, if you come back to life, will the insurance company want their money back?
If they're still in business, if they still exist.
With interest.
Yeah, right. And will they exist? Because with all I was just talking to a friend of mine in the insurance business, and he said we're just getting hammered because of global climate change. He said,
they're getting hammered because of global climate change.
Paying billions and billions of dollars. He said Nationwide has lost $100 billion a year over the last 3 years because of hurricanes and flooding.
Or property insurance?
Yeah. And they stopped writing new policies.
Wow.
I mean, when insurance companies start freaking out, you've got issues.
Yeah. That's not a good sign when insurance companies are freaking out.
No, they rarely are short on cash. So it's like, again, that's another big thing that's going on. It's another big force that's taking place, that's converging, in the 21st century. You got to really hold on to your diapies.
So